Okay, well, apologize for the late start. We're trying some new audio and video connections here, and the only time we have to test it is when we're all together and we have everything set up. And for those of you who listen online, you'll notice sometimes I'm saying I got to get out of here, I got to get done. And the reason for that is we rent a building and we have to tear up and set down. And so if I go over, that means there's a lot of people that don't get to go home with their families when their families are ready to leave. So that's the reason why we're on sort of a time limit here. So this week, I posted something on my Facebook page yesterday about that my update this week might not be as upbeat as it usually is. So I'm a realistic optimism. Look, in the end, I know how this thing works out. Until then, though, it's going to be, I believe, a very turbulent time. And I don't know anywhere in the world that you could go. Next week, I didn't have time to get it done. I'm going to play you a little sort of a war game scenario that you can do, and I'll show you how to do it at home. There's an app that you can do this on. For example, I think one of the things they use is a smallpox outbreak and what happens. And it's pretty stunning. It could be frightening if you didn't know where you were going to end up. That's the way I look at it. And we'll look at that next week. I did not have time to get it done this morning. I thought, though, since it's a little bit of a heavy week, I would start off with something humorous. And a friend of mine sent me an email with things that are called neologisms or neologism. And what it means is it's a newly coined word or expression. Because we know there's always words being added to the vocabulary, especially in the English-speaking world. So here are some neologisms, some new words that people have made up. For example, here is one that's called sarcasm. And it's a noun, and it means the gulf between the author of the sarcastic wit and the person who doesn't get it. Ah, you got it. Okay. Good sign. This one, boson. Noun, the substance surrounding stupid people that stops bright ideas from penetrating. The boson layer, unfortunately, shows little sign of breaking down in the near future. I wrestled with this one, but I said it to my wife, and bless her heart, she got all of them, and she's very intelligent, so I thought that was good. So she laughed at this one, so here goes. Castration. Noun, the act of buying a house which renders the subject financially impotent for an indefinite period. And here's a good one, hepatitis. Noun, it means terminal coolness, and I think that, yes, that's one of the examples of terminal coolness that I can think of. Here's one called the decathlon, the grueling event of getting through the day consuming only things that are good for you. I think I have two more. The Doppler effect, the tendency of stupid ideas to seem smarter when they come at you rapidly. Oh, I have two more. This one is Carmageddon. It's like when everybody is sending off all these really bad vibes, right? And then like the earth explodes and it's like a serious bummer. And then this one really was my personal favorite. It's called arachnoleptic fit. Arachnoleptic fit. It's a noun. The frantic dance performed just after you've accidentally walked through a spider web. Okay? Yeah, I did that. It took me 10 minutes to do that one this morning, and I forgot to put one video in, but that one was important to get in. So each week we talk about and I have a whole raft of these that a friend sent, so we'll maybe do some more next week. But the convergence of events, it's clear that there's a lot of things going on. A lot of things happening geopolitically, culturally. We're going to take a look at some of those things today it does seem, as I used this graphic last week, that it's like everybody's ready to pop the world, pop the balloon that's the world. And you know what happens when a balloon pops? It kind of goes off in all kinds of crazy directions. So, first up, Department of Corrections. Now, this is usually Steve Mitchell who has to do this, but last week I misidentified this bridge as the San Mateo Bridge, which is on the southern part of the Bay, San Francisco Bay. This is really the Richmond, I think Richmond San Rafael Bridge. And if I'm not wrong, I'm sure somebody will correct me. The interesting thing about this, and somebody made a point, we'll shut down a bridge construction project that costs millions of dollars to save a hummingbird egg. And we'll spend millions of dollars a year to get rid of human beings in the womb. It just shows how warped our values have become. This is a report that was issued back in 2011 by the Navy. It's also been done by the Air Force and Army. And it's called the Department of the Navy Diversity and Inclusion Roadmap. And they issued an update to it this just about a week ago. After Trump was sworn in, the leadership of the Navy felt it was important to put out this report that talks about they have transgender dress codes and what's acceptable in the Navy. It is a level of, the other report that came out this week were some leaders from the Joint Chiefs and others that went to Congress and testified that in the Marine, I think it's in the Marine Air Squadrons, 62% of the planes cannot fly. In the Navy, 50% of our planes are non-operational because of budget cuts and lack of spare parts. And I have a friend who's a retired general in one of the branches of the service, and he confirmed for me yesterday that everything they said about that was true. It's not made up to get more money. I think our Army brigades or divisions, only about half of them could be sent into service in very short order. So we may have a big service, but we're not ready. Excuse me, can somebody watch this thing? Because it is really hot up here. I'm not sure why the heat turns on, and it's like blowing right down on me, and you don't want to see me sweat. I even went and got a jacket out today. Elaine Donnelly at the Center for Military Readiness talked about this. There was a report last year that the Thunderbirds, which is the Air Force show, 5 or 6 planes, jets that go out, they got 14 applications for places to replace people. 13 of them came from white males, and that was important for the Thunderbird guy to say we need more diversity because that makes us stronger. Diversity is what always makes us stronger, is what they say. Now, I'm thinking if I'm flying a plane at 600 miles an hour next to you, I don't care what color you are, what sex you are. I want the best pilot 3 feet from me at 600 miles an hour. But this is the way it is. And these are the military leaders that are insisting on this diversity stuff. Elaine Donnelly at the Center for Military Readiness said this to me about the report that was updated on gender and diversity. To me, the most important thing is the audacity of the Navy in releasing the document after the inauguration. Pentagon holdovers need to understand that they work for a new commander-in-chief, and boy, is she right. Now, sometimes when you hear something happen geopolitically, you need to look behind it. This week, Donald Trump had a meeting or a telephone call. I guess he had a meeting with the leader of China, or a telephone call. And he came out afterward and said he supported the one China policy. Remember there was a controversy because he took a congratulatory phone call from the leader of Taiwan right after the inauguration. And everyone goes, oh, well, maybe he's going to change. But he came out and did not go to a two China policy, recognizing Taiwan. He went with the one China policy. Now, why would that be? Listen, sometimes policy is dictated by the facts on the ground in the real world. And the facts on the ground in the real world are in this report, which just came out a few days or a couple days before that phone call between Trump and the leader of China. It's called the Mineral Commodities Summaries of 2017. Now, you know that most of you have a smartphone, and in your smartphone is a lithium-ion battery. Lithium, it can only be mined in a relatively few places on Earth, and a lot of these rare earth elements that we use in our technology are mined in places all over the world, but China has bought them all up. And so for our technology to work in a lot of cases, we have to have some kind of working relationship with China. That's just the facts on the ground. They've been very clever in the way they've done that. So always keep that in mind when you hear it. And it's like, why would he do that? Sometimes there's a very practical reason for why that type of thing is done. Here we have, this is the cover of The Economist out of Europe, courting Russia, can it end well? And they, you know, it's interesting to watch the progression of things, that when Mitt Romney said that Russia was a problem, what happened in the election back in 2008 or 2012? He was mocked. Oh, come on, Mitt, Russia's so over. It's not a problem. Well, Russia's been very clever in projecting power. By the way, Russia's economy is about the size of Italy's. It's not anywhere approaching what our economy is, but they do have a lot of control over Europe because of the gas and that sort of thing. But Russia's been very good at projecting their power. But now the most rabid anti-communists are the Democratic Party, which is made up of a bunch of communists. It doesn't really make any sense. In the New York Post is an article this week about Barack. He won't Barack down is the title of the editorial. You can go read it. It's pretty good. He has set up all of these organizations. The other thing that's going on is that, and I'm not a fan of Alex Jones. I watched something of his last night. It was probably the first time in 6 months I've seen anything he did. And I think what he was ranting about was right, is that there's a war going on within our government. The civil servants that are holdovers from the prior administration they're fighting Trump on everything. And the Democrats are keeping him from getting his cabinet people in place to go in there and clean house. So this is, you know, pray for our leader. You should always pray for our leaders. But there's a tremendous amount of opposition to whatever he is doing from within the federal government. I mentioned to you last week that there are reports, I think, from Politico and other news agencies that federal employees are getting together in groups and using encrypted apps so that the government can't track who they're talking to or what they're saying. And I think my suggestion last week was, if you're found using one of those as a federal employee, you need to go. So there's a lot of things I know that the president wants to do, and he's sort of hamstrung right now. But listen to what this article says in the New York Post about Obama. He's doing it through a network of leftist nonprofits led by Organizing for Action. Normally, you'd expect an organization set up to support a politician and his agenda to close up shop after that candidate leaves office. But not Obama's OFA, Organizing for Action. Rather, it's gearing up for battle with a growing war chest and more than 250 offices across the country. This is what Obama told the people involved with him. It is fine for everybody to feel stressed, discouraged, he said in a conference call from the White House, but get over it. He demanded that they move forward to protect what we've accomplished. Now is the time for some organizing, he said, so don't mope. Far from sulking, OFA activists helped organize anti-Trump marches across U.S. cities, some of which turned into riots. After Trump issued a temporary ban on immigration from 7 terror-prone Muslim nations, The demonstrators jammed airports, chanting, "No ban, no wall, no sanctuary at all." I mentioned last week the riots at Cal Berkeley when Mio Yiannopoulos was going to speak there. If you think that that's a one-off or it was just a few agitators, this week the Daily Cal, which is the Daily Californian, which is the campus newspaper for the University of California at Berkeley, had a series of op-eds written by people. And you can see from the titles of each one of these, check your privilege when speaking of protests. Summary of that, pro-violence. Op-ed, next one, violence helped ensure safety of students. Summary, pro-violence. Black Bloc did what campus should have. Translation, summary, pro-violence. Condemning protesters same as condoning hate speech. Summary, pro-violence. Finally, the last one, plurality of tactics contributed cancellation of Mio Yiannopoulos event. Summary, pro-violence. Listen, we have a major problem on our college campuses. These people, these are, I believe Dennis Prager refers to them as seminaries of leftism. And you need to, if you're sending your kid to a public school like that, you need to make sure they are rock solid in what they believe before they leave, because they will be assaulted, bullied, whatever, to get them to change their minds away from traditional and conservative and Christian values. The Atlantic is praising the fact that the California Republic comes roaring back. They want to secede. They want to do whatever they want. They're turning it into a sanctuary state. Colleges and universities all over the country are turning themselves into sanctuary campuses. Cities all over the place, Cincinnati, I believe Dayton and Columbus have now done it. I think Toledo as well. In Ohio and elsewhere have made themselves sanctuary cities where the police are being instructed by their superiors not to help at all in immigration enforcement. Now, remember Sheriff Joe Arpaio was trying to enforce the immigration laws in California or in Arizona and help out, what did they do? They took him to court to make him stop because they don't care about borders. Remember the video from Caroline Glick last week? Globalists are against the nation-state borders. They want a one world. Borders shouldn't mean anything. Everybody should be able to come and go as they plead. And one country's values, particularly values of countries like Israel and like America in particular, need to be destroyed. And that's what it's all about. It really is a war. Now, a couple of things. I had some people email me this week about a couple of conferences. One of the conferences, and I don't have any slides on it, I'm going to look up one because there's a quote that I wanted to get and I didn't get it into my presentation. One of the conferences was Gathering. And it's a gathering for women. It's put on, started a few years ago by a lady named, it's not this one, but by a lady named Jenny Allen. And she said the Lord came to her and told her that she's supposed to make up these conferences. And somebody from another church contacted me this week, called me and said, people in the church are going to this conference, and I want to know what you think about it. Now, I've not known that much about this, but I looked it up. Jen Hatmaker, who's the HGTV show person who's writing books and Bible studies for women, speaks at these conferences, and she and her husband have come out clearly in support of same-sex marriage and in support of people who lead a homosexual lifestyle. Jenny Allen was asked about that, and she gave what I would only consider to be one of the most weak, wishy-washy answers that I've ever heard anybody give. I read her blog about it, or her Q&A. It was terrible. It was pathetic. She did not take a stand on anything, sort of like it's up to the individual. It was full of relativism. I checked to see, they have a number of conferences, and these things have grown. They're in hundreds and hundreds of churches now do live streaming of their events. The conferences are usually free because they usually bring in women to speak, like Jen Hatmaker. So there's an upcoming conference. So I went out and I dug around, and I'm pretty good at researching on the internet and digging things out. I am telling you that I could not find who the speakers are going to be at the event that they have coming up. Now, what does that tell you? The reason they don't do that is because they get criticism in advance, and people might not come if they know who's speaking at these things. That is a huge red flag. A friend of mine actually called their office and they said, our policy is not to announce speakers in advance. So when people are not willing to do that, I would say a good rule of thumb will be don't go. Just don't go. Your life will be as full and rich as you can imagine without it. Now this one, the coming up in Los Angeles, God Lab, June 8th through 10th. And listen, you only have, I think early registration may be going on for another day or two. And you can get in for this conference for the bargain price of $699 if you register right away. Then it goes up to $799, and if you wait till the last minute, it's $899. Now, I'm always interested when people who lean left and are probably socialists in their political life charge $699 to go to a conference. So here are some of the speakers. One of the speakers is a lady named Barbara Brown Taylor. In 2011, Time magazine came out, or 2013, came out with their 100 most influential people on the planet. Now, I'm going to guess that nobody here has ever heard of Barbara Brown Taylor. I have to look at her name because I've never heard of her. She writes books on religion, and Time considers her one of the most influential people in the world. Those are the other religious leaders that were identified in that particular magazine. Of course, the other person that's there is Rob Bell. He's back speaking at Christian conferences. I guess he's done making the money that he can off of the Oprah circuit. A number of years ago, he had a book out. I actually had a copy of it, and I think I either burned it or shredded it and threw it away because I didn't want anybody else to find it and actually read it, called Velvet Elvis. And I would say that Rob's books were, pretty thin, and most of the pages were white spaces, just like the cover there. And I would say that the value, the intellectual and theological value that you got from that book would be found in the white spaces. Because if you actually read the black type, you would be misled. So that was Velvet Elvis. Of course, then he came out with the one where he said, hell didn't exist. That's Love Wins. And this quote, which we've played a number of times, captures what the God Lab conference is about. Listen to what he says at the end. This is Oprah asking, are evangelicals going to accept gay marriage?
When is the church going to get that?
We're close,
I think it's evolving. I think it's...
Lots of people are already there. We think it's inevitable, and we're moments.
Moments away from the church
absolutely.
accepting it.
Absolutely. So I say
You think we're moments away?
I think culture is already there, and the church will continue to be even more irrelevant when it quotes letters from 2,000 years ago as their best defense. The church will continue to be even more irrelevant when it quotes letters from 2,000 years ago as their best defense.
And that's the title of the conference. It says, can an ancient book guide us into the future? Okay, now listen. Maybe somebody could set up a GoFundMe account. I'm willing to give you the summary of that whole conference, the right answer to that question. Can an ancient book guide us into the future? $2.99. No period, by the way. $2.99. And so just set up a GoFundMe account. You can send me, PayPal contributions. I'm joking, of course. The answer is, can an ancient book guide us into the future? Yes, absolutely. I mean, and we talk about it. I talk about it every week of my life now for 20 years. It can. And you shouldn't listen to people like Rob Bell because they don't know what they're talking about. Here's another speaker at the conference, is Latricia Hawkins, I believe is her name, Letitia Hawkins. She was a Wheaton College professor who showed up wearing a hijab, a scarf, headscarf, and kind of a short skirt, which is, we can talk about the intellectual inconsistency or disconnect there later. But she came out at Wheaton College. Remember the evangelical Harvard? That's what it's called, right? The place where every evangelical wants to go. What did she say? Muslims and Christians worship the same God. She was put on suspension, and the report later came out. This was about a year, almost exactly a year ago. This was in the Chicago Tribune. A tenured professor at Wheaton College, suspended for saying Muslims and Christians worship the same God, has reached an agreement with the West Suburban Evangelical School to end her employment there, while the administrator who called for her termination has apologized for acting in haste. They were going to bring her back. And then when, she decided not to come back, it was I guess it was a trigger event, so they had a big campus prayer meeting about the trauma that was caused on campus. She was a tenured Wheaton professor. So she's speaking, okay? You're $6.99, or soon to be $8.99. We'll get you that. And then here's Diane Butler Bass, who has written a book called Christianity After Religion: The End of the Church and the Birth of a New Spiritual Awakening. And listen to what she says here in this book. This is from pages 36 and 99 of the book. Conventional, comforting Christianity has failed. It does not work. For the churches that insist on preaching it, the jig is up. We cannot go back. Now, she's considered in the emerging church and among other evangelicals to be an evangelical. This is from Lighthouse Trails, quoting from her book. We cannot go back, and we should not want to. In earlier American awakenings, there were two. Remember the first and second? And the second was a complete failure. It led to the burned over district up in upstate New York. Charles Finney was probably the leading evangelist. I'm pretty sure Finney was not even saved. And he was the one who started essentially the altar call. He was the second president of Oberlin. You can go and see his grave up there at the cemetery in Oberlin. But be careful when you're walking around. You might step on somebody from Bethel Church who's there doing some grave soaking or something to soak up the spirit of that false teacher. In early American awakenings, see, I was there. That was a good sentence because I got like 4 shots in. In early American awakenings, preachers extolled old-time religion as the answer to questions about God, morality, and existence. This awakening is different. It is not about sawdust trails, mortification of sin, putting to death the old man, and being washed in the blood of the Lamb, the preaching of the cross. The awakening going on around us is not an evangelical revival. It is returning to the faith of our fathers or recreating it is not returning to the faith of our fathers or recreating our grandparents' church. Instead, it is a great returning to ancient understandings of the human quest for the divine. And listen, what she means by this is anything goes. And these people are into mysticism, centering prayer, lectio divina, all of those pagan practices. They love Merton, they love Thomas Keating. All of these things, they are false. And they are big into the spiritual formation movement, which, by the way, now I don't even have a slide on this. That is now a major in many evangelical colleges, spiritual formation. A mix of mysticism and psychology. It is not, in my view, based on my research, and I know Steve Mitchell would agree 100% with me, it is not biblical. And so when you see these spiritual formation programs and now majors at Christian colleges, you need to dig into what they're really about. Because you're going to find Richard Foster's Celebrations of Distance. You're going to find Merton, the Catholic monk who was really more Buddhist than anything else. You're going to find Keating. You're going to find all of these connections. You're going to find links to people like Lynn Hybels and other people from Willow Creek who have been promoting this throughout the evangelical church. You're going to find links to Phileena Hurwitz and her mystic Catholicism that she's shoving down the throats of Christian colleges all over the country as she speaks. Listen, it's not biblical. What's happening is this mysticism acts sort of like general anesthesia, and it puts people to sleep so they can't figure out what the truth is. And you need to avoid it. And then finally, the last guy is N.T. Wright. Now, N.T. Wright is an Anglican bishop from England. He wrote a great book, Defending the Resurrection, a long time ago. And I think that book is pretty good. But in later years, N.T. Wright has done what a lot of Christian leaders do, unfortunately. Look, I pray that it doesn't happen to me. I pray that it didn't happen to people that I know. But what these evangelical leaders, Christian leaders do, is they will be very good for a short time. And when they are good like that, they build up a tremendous capital account of goodwill. And then they change and they spend the rest of their lives draining that goodwill account down to zero. And I think a lot of them hope that they die before they've completely gone bankrupt in their goodwill account. Tom Wright, N.T. Wright, is one of these people. He came out with a book a number of years ago, Rethinking Paul, New Perspective on Paul, and essentially changed to away from individual atonement for sins and to sort of a group thing. He then came out with another book called In the Day the Revolution Began. This is one of his most recent ones, Reconsidering the Meaning of Jesus' Crucifixion. So when you see somebody say doing this, reimagining the faith, rethinking Christianity, reconsidering the crucifixion, what should happen? Red flags should go up all over the place that's a caution sign that somebody's doing. This is from the Amazon description. In the day the revolution began, N.T. Wright once again challenges the commonly held Christian beliefs as he did in his acclaimed Surprised by Hope, demonstrating the rigorous intellect and breathtaking knowledge that have long defined his work. Wright argues that Jesus' death on the cross. Brian, you need to do a better job in writing the descriptions about me in the YouTube thing. Because I never see this about the rigorous intellect and breathtaking knowledge. So I forgive you already. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Wright argues that Jesus' death on the cross was not only to absolve us of our sins, it was actually the beginning of a revolution, commissioning the Christian faithful to a new vocation, a royal priesthood responsible for restoring and reconciling all of God's creation. So what does that mean? He's a dominionist. He thinks we're going to rebuild the kingdom of God on earth, and then when we've done such a good job, Jesus will return. Now, here's my take on that. If the church is the vehicle for rebuilding the kingdom of God on earth, then it has been a massive failure. Can we agree? For 2,000 years. In the sense that I don't think it's created the kingdom of God like we see the descriptions of the millennial kingdom in Scripture. It's not created anything like that anywhere on earth, not even in villages or small towns. So maybe, just maybe, that's not the mission of the church. And it's not. And so, but people like Wright, because they have breathtaking knowledge and rigorous intellect, they think we've got it all figured out where everybody else got it wrong. And they have a close connection to some of these New Apostolic Reformation charismatic types who think we're going to change everything in the world. The last few weeks ought to be an indication that that's probably not going to happen. As I said, I'm optimistic. I know what happens to me in the long term. Okay? I know what happens to all the people who remain faithful to the gospel of Jesus Christ in the long term. And some of us may go through very, very tough times before we're out of here. Some of us may get raptured. Some may not. Depending, I'm not going to argue about the timing of the rapture, but I'm just saying is, God's got your back. And regardless of how you leave this existence, you're with Christ. So you win in the end. That's the optimism that we have. And we know that when Jesus does return in this phenomenal, glorious appearing of his to set up his kingdom and defeat the armies of Satan, cast the Antichrist and the false prophet alive into the lake of fire, and set up his kingdom, that's really great. And we're all going to participate in that. So we all have this great, fantastic hope, regardless of what happens to us in our existence, until God decides how we leave. So I'm fine with that. I do take great comfort in that. I don't lay awake at night worrying about it. As a friend of mine said, I hope that if I'm going to be a martyr, it's quick. It's beheading rather than burning at the stake or something like that, because I don't want to, I'm like anybody else, I don't want to suffer pain. But look, God and the Holy Spirit will take us through all of the things that he has, and he'll come back and wrap things up in accordance with his prophetic word to his glory. Our obligation is to serve him until then. But we all have, look, the Christians who are getting beheaded in Iran and Iraq, they have hope of what if they're killed, what happens to them? They're with the Lord. They win. So just keep that in mind. It is very troubling. I will admit, it's tough to watch all this stuff going on. So N.T. Wright, Finding Mr. Right, so he's going to be at this conference. And the other one is Rachel Held Evans. And for some reason, I don't know if I put her in there. Oh, I had her in the back. She wrote a book about, what was it called? Searching for Sunday. And you saw her in a clip I played a few weeks ago where she was sort of laughing when Tony Jones said, "I know more than Jesus." So these are the people that 2 Peter talks about. These are wells without water, clouds that are carried with a tempest, to whom the mist of the darkness is reserved forever. For when they speak great swelling words of vanity, they allure through the lust of the flesh, through much wantonness, those that were clean escape from those who live in error. While they promise them liberty, they themselves are the servants of corruption, for whom a man is overcome of the same bondage is he brought in bondage. For if they have escaped the pollutions of the world, for if after they have escaped the pollutions of the world, through the knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, they are again entangled therein and overcome, the latter end is worse with them than the beginning. For it had been better for them not to have known the way of righteousness than, after they had known it, to turn from the holy commandment delivered unto them. But it is happened unto them according to the true proverb, the dog is turned to his vomit, the dog is turned to his own vomit again, and the sow that was washed to her wallowing in the mire. 2 Timothy 3:6 says this, for of this sort are they which creep into houses. They're teachers. They have a form of godliness. And then verse 6, for of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with divers lusts, ever learning and never coming to a knowledge of the truth. And I would add the John Haller updated version, translation of that would be, ever learning, ever putting on very expensive conferences, and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Okay. So let's look a little bit at politics. It's been a chaotic week. You all know about this case. The president put out an executive order banning travel from 7 countries for 90 days, putting in strong vetting. The president even tweeted this, our legal system is broken. Sometimes I wish he wouldn't do this, but it does sort of get ahead of the news people. Our legal system is broken. 77% of refugees allowed into the U.S. since travel reprieve hail from 7 suspect countries. So dangerous. And I agree with him. There are a number of studies that came out. Now, I may have mentioned this last week. In the hearing before the district court judge in Washington, the Department of Justice attorney was asked, is there ever been anybody who's committed a terrorist, and you have to be very careful as you watch the progression of this and the way the arguments are used by the leftists because they mischaracterize things. So the judge asked, anybody ever been convicted? Well, the DOJ lawyer, the Department of Justice lawyer, is from the civil division, and he says, well, I don't know. And the judge says, well, I'll tell you the answer is 0. No, here's the response to that. Judge, you don't know what you're talking about. Now, the DOJ lawyer probably didn't know. Why? Because the Obama administration, Department of Justice, refused to track that kind of information. Why? Because it didn't fit with their narrative that Islam is a religion of peace. And so they didn't want to track people that might sully or undermine their narrative, the truth that they wanted to create. And they were pretty effective at this. But it was the same people in DOJ, Eric Holder and Hillary Clinton at State, that went into our friend Phil Haney's computer at the Department of Homeland Security and deleted all of his records off of the computer system, where he had tied together the connections between all of these mosques that are preaching and pushing terror in the United States and their connection. And to the extent that Phil is convinced, and having talked to him a lot about it, I'm convinced he's correct. There was a good chance that San Bernardino and Orlando would not have happened if that information had not been deleted off of the system, or maybe not happened to the extent that it had. So the DOJ lawyer didn't know, and the judge certainly didn't know, okay? And this is the problem. The judges are unaccountable. So I just will say this in case any judge that I'm ever in front of is listening to this. I'm talking about other judges other than you. Look, they're not accountable, okay? And it can be very intimidating to be in federal court. I'll admit that. They have a lifetime appointment. And there's only been a few impeached. There was, I think, Alcee Hastings down in Florida was impeached a number of years ago because he was taking bribes and whatnot. So he was impeached. He was thrown off the federal court bench. And then he got elected to Congress. And I think he's still serving in Congress to this day. So shows you the standards for Congress are a little bit lower than we think. And by the way, anytime anybody says Trump has low approval ratings, compare those to the approval ratings of the media and Congress, and you'll find he's doing pretty good in today's day and age. But these reports were out. So the Senate kept a database. They went out with publicly available information and tried to find it. And they found that there were at least 72 people from these countries who had been convicted of terrorism. Now, when you watch when a Democrat or a leftist or somebody opposed to the ban gets on CNN or whatever, what they will argue is, no one from these countries has ever been convicted of killing anyone, right? Okay, now listen. Okay, on a scale of, this being moronic and this being highly intelligent, okay, that argument is down here. Why? Well, we've had 2 terrorist attacks in the last year in Columbus, Ohio. The man, pray for him. I see he's in a wheelchair. He had a bad accident last month. Or the owner of the Nazareth restaurant out there on the northeast side near New Albany. Remember the guy went in with a machete and was hacking. There was a great front page article about the people that are recovering because it just happened a year ago. And was that terrorist convicted? No. Why? Because they shot him dead. Okay? So dead people never go to trial. They vote, but they don't go to trial. And the Ohio State attack that just happened around Thanksgiving, was that terrorist ever convicted? No, because he was shot dead. So, but he was from one of the 7 countries. Both of them were from, I think, Somalia, although I've heard one of them might have been from the guy from the Nazareth. In any event, the president is allowed to do this. Very interesting conversation between Dennis Prager and John Eastman, former dean of the Chapman University Law School in California, about this ruling. The Ninth Circuit, as they're prone to do, they get reversed 80% of the time a case gets to the Supreme Court. Not a very good record, okay? It's like going 2-8. I mean, and somebody did that at Ohio State. What happens to them? You're gone. But they have a lifetime appointment, so they don't have to be that careful. And the cases that don't get appealed, they get to do what they want. So John Eastman and Dennis Prager, here's just a little bit of that conversation.
It's unfortunate that Most people expected the Ninth Circuit to do this, even though the law is so clearly in favor of President Trump here. Unambiguously clear. And one aspect of this case, the courts have been removed from even having jurisdiction to decide questions of visa revocation. It's right there in federal law and directly authorized by Article 3 of the Constitution. And these judges are just thumbing their nose at the law and the Constitution on the limits on their own power and the clear authority that the president has here.
And the president does have authority in the Constitution, which really lays it out. First of all, what the Constitution does is it gives immigration authority to Congress in Article 1, Section 8. Here's a little bit more of the conversation between Prager and Eastman. They're going to talk about the statute that Congress enacted pursuant to its authority. It's been on the books for a long time, probably 65 years. And listen to this part.
That's right. And you've got another federal judge in Boston who issued a thorough opinion citing the statute, citing governing Supreme Court precedent, which says, look, the decision on whether to admit somebody or not to this country is no right. It's a privilege, and it is vested, whether we do that or not, is vested in the political branches of the government, particularly in the president, largely immune from judicial review. And he upheld the president's order. And then you get a judge in Seattle that issues a nationwide injunction that effectively vacates a judge in Boston who, he has no authority to do that.
Is there a precedent for this?
No, this is stunning. Let me give you another aspect of this, because they're focusing on the due process clause in the Ninth Circuit opinion. The Supreme Court has made clear that because you don't have any right to come into the United States, you have no due process rights because you have to have some property or liberty interest that's being deprived before we attach process to it. Without any right or liberty interest or property interest in coming to the United States, no due process. But the courts have also dealt with, and one other aspect of the order revokes visas of people already here. There are some due process rights that could possibly attach.
And he reads the statute. I probably turned the slide too quickly. Whenever the President, 8 U.S.C. Code, Section 1182, Part F, suspension of entry or imposition of restrictions by President. Whenever the President finds that the entry of any aliens or any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may, by proclamation and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. So what did Congress do? They ceded their power to the President. The courts have no say in it. And it's worse. And trust me, Article 3 of the Constitution of the United States sets up the judiciary. Congress has the ability to determine what cases can be heard in the federal courts of the United States. For example, they can set up a mechanism where citizens of one state can sue citizens of another state. So, for example, hypothetical, this has never happened, okay? If my wife put stuff that I like to use someplace where I can't find it, I can't make a federal case out of it. And bless her heart, she's been on an organizing tear, and the house looks great, but I told her, just quit moving my stuff because I can't find it. But I couldn't make a federal case out of it because it has to be between citizens of different states. We both are citizens of the state of Ohio. So as long as that is the case, I couldn't sue her in federal court for it. And plus, you also have to have a threshold limit of $75,000 or $100,000 in controversy. And nothing I have, trust me, is worth that much. It's certainly not worth suing my wife over. I want that to be clear. But the courts the Congress has limited the jurisdiction of the courts. Here's another discussion between Prager and Eastman.
There are some due process rights that could possibly attach. But Article 3 of the Constitution gives Congress full authority to deprive lower courts of jurisdiction to consider any matter. And here's Section 1201 of Title 8 of U.S. Code. After the issuance of a visa, the Secretary of State may at any time in his discretion revoke such visa. And then this is the key part. And again, this is not cited by the Ninth Circuit panel. There shall be no means of judicial review of a revocation of visas. I mean, it cannot get any clearer. This is a usurpation of power.
Will it go to the Supreme Court?
It will. But, the Supreme Court, a few years ago in a case dealing with Guantanamo Bay, Congress revoked the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court to consider that matter, and the court ignored it. I mean, this really is stunning. We have gone from judicial review to judicial supremacy to judicial tyranny and despotism. This is stunning. And in response to an election, they are deliberately undermining the authority not just of the president but of the American people to decide the course of action of this country.
And he's right. He used an example in that discussion of 1979. That was just the anniversary was just celebrated in Tehran. Death to Israel, death to America. That's who they want to get. So the Islamists this is 1979 when the embassy in Tehran was stormed, people taken hostage under the Carter administration. Jimmy Carter, the great social justice warrior now, what did he do? He banned all visas. He revoked all visas of all Iranians. All of them. What happened? A group of Iranian students from the University of Michigan went across the river in Detroit to Canada for an evening of entertainment. And when they tried to come back across the border, what happened? They couldn't get in. What did they do? They sued. What happened in the lawsuit? The court threw the case out. Why? Because this statute said no judicial review of revocation of visas. The courts have absolutely no power to do it. This is a judicial coup. That's the words of John Eastman. This is judicial tyranny. So Congress needs to do something. They can break up the Ninth Circuit. They could impeach the judges if they wanted to, I think, but you got to get 2/3 vote to do that. And like I said, it's only happened half a dozen times or so in the history of the United States. So I don't think that's going to happen. Trump was talking last night. He was down in Florida meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister that he might issue a new order. Just tear up this one, which would moot the case and throw it out, or he might wait a little bit, see how the Supreme Court nomination goes. They have 30 or 60 days to appeal that ruling. The TRO is really only effective for another week. Depends whether the lower court would extend it. It's now being reported that the Ninth Circuit is asking for briefs to be filed simultaneously, I think tomorrow, by the Department of Justice and by the state of Washington, which, by the way, they have no standing to bring this lawsuit. They have no particularized injury. Okay, they claim injury because foreign students can't come to our campus and pay our outlandish, ridiculous tuition rates for out-of-state students. That's not injury, okay? That's not, it's easy to understand injury if you get run over by a car. You have an injury that you can sue for. They don't have anything. This is all, on every single level, this is complete nonsense. Even Alan Dershowitz, a left-wing person, but he respects the Constitution and the laws of the United States, says this is nonsense. Other left-wing professors have come out and said the same thing. This is judicial tyranny. Trump's reaction has been they're going after picking up illegal aliens who have been convicted of crimes. Here's some things just sort of related to this to show how the judges don't know what they're talking about. Democrats think Muslims are worse off here than Christians are in the Muslim world. This is a Rasmussen report survey just released this week. Listen to what this says. 56% of Democrats believe most Muslims in this country are mistreated. But look at this, a view shared by 22% of Republicans and 39% of voters not affiliated with either major party. We've lost our minds in the United States. Are you kidding me? Yeah, it was this Muslim Somalian who ran over and tried to stab people down in Ohio State mistreated? No. He got what was coming to him. Fewer Democrats think most Christians are mistreated in the Islamic world compared to 76% of GOP voters and 64% of unaffiliated. But those numbers are just stunning. Nearly as many voters under 40 think most Muslims are mistreated in America, 51%, as think most Christians are mistreated in the Muslim world. Older voters by a 2-to-1 margin believe the treatment of Christians in the Muslim world is worse than that of Muslims in this country. Here is, I'm going to have to find her little, I may have deleted it. This is the head of foreign policy in the EU, and I think, well, in my haste, I deleted it. She gave the weak foreign ministry response about immigration, and this is what we Europeans are about. And this was in front of the European Parliament, but then our friend Nigel Farage stood up and said this from the United Kingdom.
Seems to me that actually, with all the anti-Trump rhetoric that is coming from everywhere, actually what we're hearing is the true nature of the European project, which is genuine anti-Americanism.
Watch this guy behind him.
Trump is motivated by protecting the United States of America from Islamic terrorism, whereas what has happened in this room and in governments around Europe is you have welcomed these people into your own homes. But can we please, just for a moment, look at the facts? Amongst all the hyperbole and the hysteria, all that Donald Trump has done is taken 7 countries that were identified by President Obama as posing a risk to the USA. Obama already had put in place extreme vetting. What Trump has done is for 90 days to say, let's examine that vetting and see whether it's good enough. But I want to ask you, Mr. Verhofstadt, and all the others, with your faux outrage today, where were you when Obama in 2011 banned any Iraqi from going into the country for 6 months? Why do I hear no criticism in this chamber or from the Commission of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain and others who refuse to take a single, not one, refugee or displaced person from Syria? And how can it be that on Holocaust Day, last Friday, not a single one of you criticized the 16 countries in the world that ban Israeli Jews from even going to their country on holiday? What is this hypocrisy? So perhaps what we need to do, Mr. President, and through you to the members, perhaps what we need to do is to be a little bit more constructive. All of us here say we're Democrats. Well, here's a chance to prove it. Let us invite President Trump to come here to this European Parliament. I'm sure as Democrats you'd all agree that what we need to do is to have an open dialogue with the newly elected, most powerful man in the world. And if you throw that rejection back in my face, then you prove yourself to be the anti-democratic zealots that I always thought you were.
Now, by the way, he was publicly rebuked during the early part of his talk for being a little bit too rough on people. And by the way, I'm going to go to 12:30 since we got a late start. So if you have to leave, please do so, and you can catch the rest online. By the way, there was no public rebuke of those idiots. That guy and the guy who got up and left, I don't know if they're getting rebuked there, but they're not taking down. They're juvenile. This is an interesting stat that I found. Percentage of Congress and the European Parliament who have visited Israel. Of the United States Congress, about 85% of Republican or of the House and Senate have visited Israel. I think that's pretty good. In Europe, that number in their parliament is 13%. It probably explains a lot of what's going on. Now, I'm going to skip through some things in the interest of time. Gatestone has a number of articles. I'll just reference them. You can look them up at gatestoneinstitute.org. The Islamic Jihad and Peace with Jews. And what you'll find when you read through that article is that there's a lot of talk about peace. And Trump and Netanyahu are meeting this week. More about that in just a moment. But is there going to be peace between Islam and Jews? And there are fatwas all over the place that prevent Muslims from making peace with Jews. And this article discusses them. There is a report that, here's this statement. In their fatwa, the Muslim scholars wrote, "It is true the Prophet Muhammad signed a treaty with the infidels, including the Quraysh tribe and the Jews, but he did not make concessions that are contrary to Islam. They pointed out that the Prophet Muhammad did not strike the deal with the infidels in order to allow them to stay in their homes permanently, nor did the promise to abandon jihad as a result of this treaty they added in their fatwa. There is no evidence whatsoever that the Prophet or any of his successors had made peace with infidels controlling Islamic lands," the fatwa said. So how did they view Israel? It's Muslim land. It will always be Muslim land. And this is a copy of the fatwa that was issued by a bunch of scholars, and I believe it came out of Al-Azhar University in Cairo, which is where you remember the first big foreign policy speech made by Barack Obama on June 4th, 2009, was made at that university, where he invited in the banned Muslim Brotherhood, an organization that President Trump is now considering labeling a terrorist organization and should have been done many years ago. So you can read that article, The Islamic Jihad and Peace with Jews. Germany's Muslim demographic future. This is an interesting article talking about the collapsing birth rate, and that what Angela Merkel was trying to do by bringing in all of these Muslims was to keep Germany populated with about 82 million people. Why? Because they have social welfare benefit, they have retirement benefit that promises they've made to an aging population, and they need workers to come in and fill spots and work and pay taxes so people can get the benefits that they've been promised. It's not working. Here what it says: if most of the new immigrants arriving in Germany for the next 4 decades are from the Islamic world, the Muslim population of Germany could jump to well over 20 million and account for more than 25% of overall Germans. Trust me, it's going to be much more than that. Why? Because they're going to bring a lot of people with them. They're already over 6 million. It's right now about 8% of the population of Germany. It's going to increase. Because why? Because 75% or 80% of the people who have come in have been military-age males without spouses. So what are they going to do? They're going to bring in people. They're going to bring in multiple wives. There's already problems with no-go zones, Sharia law, polygamy, all sorts of things, child brides. All of this is happening in Germany right under Angela Merkel's nose, and she's collapsed the country. I think it will go much, much faster. I don't think you're going to see 25% by 2060. I think you're going to see 25% probably by 2030 at the rate things are going. But they're going to come in and get jobs, right? So how's that working out? Look at this. A recent survey found that the 30 biggest German companies have employed only 54 refugees out of 2 million, including 50 who have been hired as couriers by Deutsche Post, the logistics provider. So among the 30 largest, other than the 50 that work for this one company, there's been 4. And why? Because they're just not qualified education-wise to this. Meanwhile, migrants committed 209,000 crimes in 2015. This figure represented an 80% increase over 2014 and worked out to around 570 crimes committed by migrants every day, or 23 crimes each hour, between January and December 2015. And I think it's gotten worse. A leaked German intelligence document warned that mass migration from the Muslim world will lead to increasing political instability in the country. The document warned that the integration of hundreds of thousands of illegal migrants will be impossible given the large numbers involved and the already existing Muslim parallel societies in Germany. So the great social experiment has already been pronounced a failure by people in the government. Same thing is happening in Sweden. No-go zones, rapes, off the charts. People encouraged not to talk about it, not to report rapes. It's the society, from my perspective, appears to be collapsing. You can read Noni Darwish's has a great column also that came out today. Okay, to our north, here's what's going on. Now, I don't want to go too far on this, because we want to stay factual. But a liberal MP, you can look at this and get her, Iqra Khalid, is a Muslim MP from Mississauga, a suburb of Toronto. And she's introduced a thing called Motion 103, M103. It's up for debate this week. It'll probably pass. And essentially, it says, we got to get rid of Islamophobia. By the way, when she was at York University, she headed up the Canadian equivalent of the Muslim Students Association, which is one of the front groups for the Muslim Brotherhood. Here's what it says: systemic racism and religious discrimination. This has the full support of Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. That, in the opinion of the House, the government should recognize the need to quell the increasing public climate of hate and fear, condemn Islamophobia and all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination, and take note of the petition that was delivered to the House of Commons, request a standing committee to undertake a study to look into this as to how bad the problem is in Canada, and then the committee should present its findings. So what's going to happen? This will pass. It only singles out Islamophobia, but that doesn't make any difference to the liberals that run the Canadian Parliament and head the Prime Minister. And it's going to eventually lead to a hate crime law. There's just no doubt. Now, it's not there yet, but it certainly is giving you the direction that things are going. So this is an article in the Toronto Sun talking about it. Scratch below the surface and immediately clear this is hardly about religious discrimination in general. It singles out Islamophobia by name and nothing else. There's no mention of anti-Semitism. And why not? Well, because the facts would support a claim of anti-Semitism. Here are the Canadian reports from 2013. Police reports, upper line is number of police reported hate crimes motivated by religion, 2013. What's the top line? Jewish, 3 times the amount of Muslims complaints. So the facts are there. Its first point, this editorial says, is to recognize the need to quell the increasing public climate of hate and fear. What a vague and unsubstantiated sentence. It sounds like the Ninth Circuit. This is lawmaking, folks, not social justice warrior blogging. It continues, these violent individuals do not reflect in any way the values of the teaching of all the religion of Islam. This is a false charge that's always raised. You've heard these arguments over and over. It's nonsense. So, here's what he says. But you can see how denouncing a radical imam for Sharia advocacy could end up being considered in the eyes of the motion an Islamophobic act as part of this alleged uptick in public fear. This is an attempt to silence rational critics of political Islam. And that's really where the debate should come about. It's a political system, not religious. We need to get over this. We need to make this distinction. And I think the government will do this, but look, so how are they reacting to things here? Well, Steve Bannon has become, I guess, Satan incarnate in America, at least in the left-wing press, the mainstream media. It's interesting that a lot of people are upset in the Vatican about the Pope and what he's doing, and they've come to Bannon to see, it sounds like you're a traditional values guy, and we need help opposing this Pope who's off on a left-wing bent. And, of course, I saw things saying, oh, see, there's Bannon working with the Catholic Church, so he must be the false prophet or the Antichrist, or Trump is the Antichrist. I mean, I see all of them right now. And listen, I don't trust anybody on the world stage right now. That's my personal rule of thumb because of where we are, because things could spin other way. So you may put out the Muslim Brotherhood. The New York Times had a long article about this. This is front page, above the fold. A sinister perception of Islam now steers the White House. The problem right in front of from New York City. Didn't something happen there 15 years ago that would sort of indicate that Islam is something we need to be on the lookout for. And so they go through and they bash everybody. They bash Frank Gaffney and Center for Security Policy, and I think they're right. Read Caroline Glick's article from Tuesday, The Evolving Threat of Jihad in the West, and she lays out how all this is happening, that things are changing, and the leftists, they don't see it, or they refuse to see it, or they're in league with it. Good article. There was a great on National Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney. Patrick Dunleavy was on Friday. Go look at Thursday or Friday. Go look it up. He has an article out, U.S. ill-prepared for convicted jihadis ending their prison sentences. I don't have time to go into this today. I mean, this would be a whole 2-hour, 3-hour, multi-week presentation alone, but people are being radicalized in the Islamic faith in prison. And they're being released into the general population. And we don't have any mechanism to deal with it. Now, Dunleavy, who headed up parts of the prison system in the state of New York and knows firsthand what's going on with these imams who are never vetted, come in, radicalize these guys, they radicalize other guys, they form gangs, and then they get out of prison and they're ready to do jihad. And I've heard stories from Frank Gaffney and others that talk about the fact that the drug cartels and gangs in inner cities and a lot of big cities now are tilting towards being jihadis because it gets them the power and the disdain for life that they want to terrorize other people into doing what they want. The Atlantic even notes that there's an American jihadi that is one of the main leaders. He's the online guy that gets everybody radicalized online. He's from America, from Texas. And he lives over there and he works for ISIS, and he's causing a lot of damage. The front page article in the New York Times, when they occasionally get it right, they should be recognized. Last week I referenced it. They talk about how these people that are doing these terrorist acts are enabled. Here's a conference taking place in Melbourne, Australia. The Australian Islamic Peace Conference, the Quran, the book that shook the world. Now, this is what they have on their website today. A couple days ago, this was the ad that they had. They had all the speakers, including the women. Now, look what they did to the women. They blacked them out. So they asked one of the women about it. They said this: due to the growing Islamophobia, our campaign team wanted to be extra cautious with female guests so they wouldn't be targeted in the streets. Guess what? Here's my assessment of it. That's a lie. That's Takia. That's what they do. But while Miss Tui, she's one of the speakers, said that may have been one factor, she said some organizers did not believe women should show their face in public. Well, that's pretty obvious. She was asked, is it possible this conference is organized by a very conservative strain of Islam that honestly believes women should not show their faces in public? I don't think that's very far from the truth at all. Remember this: Islamic State has tens of thousands of blank passports. That was a story from a year ago. Okay. 2 more quick things in 4 minutes. This is a full-page ad from the Washington Post on February the 8th, back of the front section. Listen to the title of this. Talk about arrogance. Top evangelical leaders from all 50 states call on President Trump and Vice President Pence to support refugees. As Christian pastors and leaders, we are deeply concerned by the recently announced moratorium on refugee settlement. Our care for the oppressed and suffering is rooted in the call of Jesus to love our neighbors as ourselves. The story of the Good Samaritan, Jesus makes it clear that our neighbor includes the stranger and anyone fleeing persecution and violence regardless of their faith or country. That's not the point of that story. That's not what it's about. But, okay, here we go. We're going to do a little eisegesis and twist the scripture to support are left-wing political views. By the way, real quick, they say Jesus was a refugee. They do, because he went to Egypt, right? Now, here's the way I analyze that. So I went and I dug out old maps. The area of Judea where he was born in Bethlehem was part of the Roman Empire at the time that he was born. Because of threats from Herod, they fled to Egypt, which was also part of the Roman Empire. Now, to me, that doesn't sound like you're a refugee. It sounds like you got out of town so you don't get killed. And there was a point of that about Jesus being called out of Egypt. My son called out of Egypt. But I don't think he qualifies as a refugee. But all these people run around, oh, he was a refugee. I don't buy it. I'm not convinced me. I'm able to be convinced. But you better bring facts when you do it. So here are some of the signers of this. Tim and Kathy Keller, pastor and author in New York City. Bill and Lynn Hybels. I wish I had time to play Lynn Hybels' statements about refugee status and Palestinians and all that. Ed Stetzer used to head up something in the Southern Baptist, Lifeway Press. He's now at Wheaton College, and I think he's the interim pastor at Moody Memorial Church. He fills the pulpit. I don't know if Lutzer is retiring or what. Ann Voskamp. Go look at Pastor Steve's thing about her. Max Lucado. Leith Anderson, head of the National Association of Evangelicals and pastor at Wooddale Church in Minneapolis. Stuart and Jill Briscoe. Let's see other names you might. Rich Nathan, Vineyard Columbus. Joel Hunter, Northland, down in Orlando. Bob Roberts at Northwood Church. He's the one who holds all the Chrislam conferences. Richard Mao, used to be head of Fuller, or may still be head of Fuller Theological Seminary. So they're all there. And this is a tweet from one of the pastors, Shay Strickland. Look at the book he's reading. The Day the Revolution Began. Remember what I said about Frank N.T. Wright? And look who else he's retweeting. See the two ones up there? Pope Francis, evangelical pastor. I don't know where he is theologically. I'm just telling you, those are red flags. Giant, huge, big, enormous red flags. Let's see. I'll play this next week. Have you seen the gumball thing on immigration? Look, if you have to leave, now I got to get it. The cruise we got to set up. Should I play it or not? Play it or not? I think I should not play it. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Very interesting. How long is this thing? A minute 34. Okay, I'll play it. This is why the evangelical thing on immigration doesn't work. Whoops. I'd start at the beginning.
The impossibility of making even a dent is actually worse than it looks here. Because last year, when we took 1 million immigrants, these countries added births over deaths, 80 million more people into the impoverished populations.
Each gumball represents a million.
And this
people.
year, Congress is bringing in 1 million legal immigrants. And this year, according to the United Nations, these countries are expected to add another 80 million people. And next year, you can be quite sure that Congress, unless stopped by the American voters, will bring in another 1 million immigrants. And these countries, unfortunately, will be adding another 80 million people into these impoverished nations. We could take 5 million a year, but we'd never get ahead of what's happening in these countries. Not in this century. Don't you see? Immigration can never be an effective or significant way to deal with the suffering people of the world. They have to be helped where they live. 99.9% of them will never be able to immigrate to a rich country. There's no hope for that.
Listen, first of all, I object when they identify themselves as top evangelical leaders, okay? Nobody voted them in, okay? And they go off on these tangents, and what they're doing doesn't make any sense. Look, I'm all for helping people. I'm all for sharing the gospel and that type of thing. But, a lot of these guys make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And so I'm like, so bring families into your own home. See, here's the distinction between left and right, one of them for me. The people on the right do charity, they support their church, they contribute to organizations. The people on the left want you to support their charity through taxes. That's the difference. And if you ever want to get a left-wing person really mad, make that argument to him. Because I did to a congressman friend of mine. He got a little bit angry. But we're still friends. And got angry because he didn't have a response, because it's true. I'm like, if you want to support it, write a check. Let's see. Well, we do have to go. There's a very important meeting taking place this week between Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump in Washington. Pray for that meeting. They'll be discussing a lot of issues, a lot of important issues, a lot of issues that touch on Bible prophecy, really, whether they know it or not. There's also a very good article on the front page of the Jerusalem Post today about Naftali Bennett. The Settler Home Party says, look, give up on this two-state solution. It's nonsense. He makes one statement that I want to quote from. Let's see. He wants no two-state solution. If in their statements after the meeting they mentioned for the first time in Trump's term their obligation to forming Palestine or two states in one way or another, we will feel it in our flesh for years to come, he wrote. We tried Palestine time and time again. We got 1,000 dead on the streets of Israel, Hamastan and Gaza, and a deterioration in our international image. He goes on to say, I don't know if I have the quote here. Essentially what he says is this: if this is not done, this will, and there's a video in his Facebook page you can get that kind of shows his it's a very good, well done summary. It's all in Hebrew, but I think you can figure it out with graphics and everything. Go watch it. But he says, if we don't do this right, it will shake the earth. And I agree with them 100%. So pray for that meeting. Let's pray. Father, thanks so much. Thank you for the patience of people here today. Pray that you bless us as we go. Keep us always in mind of our ultimate hope, of our future eternity with you because of the salvation offered by your Son, Jesus Christ, for our sins. In Jesus' name, amen.